Hello and bienvenidos. Welcome to Intersector, a series of conversations that brings together artists, activists, and policymakers. In an effort to build connections between artist activist Jo Kreiter and the local New Orleans communities at the forefront of decarceration efforts, the Contemporary Arts Center brings you our first series, Decarceration and the Arts. I'm Kaisa Peguero, Education and Public Programs Manager here at the CAC, thanking you for joining us for the sixth installment of Decarceration in the Arts. In the spring of 2021, the CAC will be presenting Jo Kreiter's The Weight Room, a spectacular aerial work that exposes the physical, mental, and emotional burden on people and women with incarcerated loved ones, centering how deep the effects of mass incarceration and detention centers run on this land first called Bulbancha. It becomes imperative to build connections with members of communities who are doing the organizing, uplifting, and necessary work on the ground. Today, we have Jo, Artistic Director of Flyaway Productions and choreographer of The Weight Room, with Zoe Boekbinder, songwriter, vocalist, musician, and one of the founders of the Prison Music Project. Zoe and Andy DeFranco produced the project's new album, Long Time Gone, in collaboration with men who are and have been incarcerated. Thank you both for being present for us today. Jo, to give some more context, could you tell us more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Kaisa. It's nice to be back with you again. And it's such an honor to be on screen with Zoe. I am a choreographer and sight artist, which means that I make dances in unusual places. I'm also a woman with an incarcerated loved one. And I have spent the last 25 years making dances that pull forward or amplify the stories of women whose voices has been removed from public discourse. And so between my own personal history with incarceration and a long-term history as a public art maker, I have arrived on making a trilogy of dances called the Decarceration Trilogy. And the first in the trilogy is The Weight Room, looking at the experiences of women with incarcerated loved ones. And in making the piece, I partnered with ESSIE Justice Group, which is an organization that focuses on women and people with gender expansive identities who have taken on a healing to advocacy model of working toward prison abolition. So the piece premiered last year, and it's having a continued life as it tours around the country, ramping up again because of COVID. We're on a pause, but ramping up again, we hope, in 2021.
And we're so looking forward to having the show here. And I'm also really excited to pair you two together. It's really sweet to have two artist activists speak about the unique roles that they have in carceral justice. So please, Zoe, can you tell us who you are and what your work is?
Yeah, thanks for having me in this conversation. It's exciting. Jo and I have talked a few times before about the similarities, the crossovers with our work. And I've been a songwriter, a folk singer for many years, many years, like 17 years or so. And 10 years ago, something changed. The thing that changed was that I entered New Folsom Prison in order to play a concert there. And I entered not knowing that that was going to open my consciousness to something that would change me and change my life forever. And really just having the personal the kind of knowledge that comes with witnessing rather than reading about or knowing statistics about is what really made the difference there. And so over the years that I worked in the prison, I shifted from someone who wrote primarily about failed relationships and heartbreak to someone who wanted to make music about social change and social justice. And the way that started in collaboration with some of the incarcerated men that I worked with at New Folsom Prison, because the major change that I wanted to see most of all, because of this work I was doing in the prison, was decarceration, and really an abolition of prisons and policing. And who better to speak to that than the people that I worked with who were personally impacted in such a deep way. And their voices didn't have a lot of ways, avenues to escape the prison, much like their bodies. And I saw that while I couldn't record their voices, I could, with permission, take their stories out with me. So that was the beginning of the Prison Music Project. There's 9 incarcerated writers, one of which we will hear from later in this video.
It's really inspiring to hear about that transformation that that this process has taken you through. And so I understand that you are an abolitionist, and as calls for abolition of the police, of ICE, of prisons ring louder and louder in where we are with the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Sarah Lee Circlebear, Tony McDade, and what feels like infinite others. What does the abolishment of prisons in particular mean to you?
I think, our criminal justice system focuses on what our current system, the questions, let's say, that we ask with the current system is what law was broken and what is the punishment? And the questions I think we should be asking are, who was harmed? How do we repair harm? And how do we best prevent future harm? And I don't think prison is an answer to any of those 3 questions. And police certainly are not. And of course, we need to address harm when it happens, but we need to center human beings and life and empathy. So, yeah, what that looks like is just a complete paradigm shift of how we think about crime, and maybe just we don't think about crime and instead we think about harm, because when harm is done or a crime is committed, there is a person or people who have been impacted, who should have a say in what happens and should be allowed an opportunity to heal and receive the support they need to do that. And instead, our current system, the state represents the crime, and the person or people who were harmed rarely have almost any role at all. And, the punishment model where we're locking people up for huge amounts of time, sometimes for a crime that actually didn't harm anyone but themselves, or maybe not even themselves, like property crimes, or even more to the point, like a drug crime, that is not reducing harm. It's actually a continuation of violence, and it doesn't prevent people from, if they ever do get released, it's not preventing anyone from making similar mistakes in the future or causing more harm in the future. And we can see evidence of that. And instead of trying to do it a different way, we're just making punishment worse and worse and worse, thinking that somehow is going to be the answer. And it's just clearly not.
Yeah, I think you're talking about a real paradigm shift there in terms of who's care and how we do that. Thank you for sharing that. And Jo, for you, how's your artist activism a part or not a part of the work you do?
Well, I think prison abolition is a response to 2 things. One is a racial justice lens on the prison industrial complex, and people like Michelle Alexander and Ava DuVernay have been far more articulate than I could be on that lens. And the creation of prisons from a march of anti-Blackness in this country that has lasted over 400 years. I also think prisons need to, and an abolitionist stance comes from an anti-violence assessment, because prison is a response to violence that embodies all the drivers of violence. And that's a concept that was introduced to me by Danielle Sered. When we look at isolation, we look at shame, we look at exposure to violence as a young person, and we look at the inability to meet one's economic needs. Those are all drivers of violence, and that's what prison brings you. Ta-da. So it's no wonder that there's a complete failure in our country to end harm. Because I don't think the prison system we have set up is actually designed to do that. As an artist, I feel like I can bring to the table imagination, hope, beauty, spectacle, the things that are in your body that you can't quite put into words. And I say that as a choreographer and someone who works with movement. Those are the tools that I bring to the table as an artist. Amplification of certain things and minimization of other things. In making the weight room, I was blessed to work with, to interview 6 women whose stories really hold the truth of what incarceration is. And something that was really important to me as we ended the piece was to ask the question, how is your story a love story? All of the women that I interviewed, with the exception of myself, I'm racialized white, were Black women or women of color. And I think it's really important to hold love as a central component of the lives of women of color, because I think, you know, the vast stereotypes around women and race might erase that centrality of love and positivity. So that's something that I could do as an artist, is amplify the lovingness of one story and not the harrowing nature of one story. And so that's how I chose to end the weight room. The ending of the piece is just stunningly beautiful and emotional. And Pamela Z, the composer, did an amazing job of taking these ideas and translating them into sonic language. And Clarissa Diaz dances the ending solo. And in her dancing, she's flying off this mast. And the only way she can fly is with the physical support of the rest of the cast, meaning we've built a set that allows for flight, allows for aerial dance, but it's mechanized through human labor. So it's only with the support of other women that Clarissa gets that experience of flight. And that was a really powerful metaphor that we all we're happy to celebrate in the piece, this idea of community building, working together, working toward a shared common good. These are things that should replace prison. So it all wraps up together for me.
I'm really curious to dive into the work that you've done with your collaborators each. But before I ask that, I want to go ahead and ask, what does it mean to be 2 white artists in proximity doing abolition work?
We talked about this last night, Joe and I, a little bit. Something I think about a lot, and I don't have. I mean, it's always shifting and moving, and it's a constant practice to show up in a white body to this work, because we can't talk about prisons and policing without talking about race, because Black people and people of color are disproportionately impacted by policing and incarceration. And I, unlike Joe, I don't, before I worked in the prison, I didn't have a personal connection to incarceration in my lifetime and in my family. It's not something I was personally connected to until I started volunteering in the prison. And now I have dear friends who are incarcerated that I made through working in the prison. But through not only my whiteness, but also my class privilege, I have been sheltered from that experience. And I think in some ways, these types of privilege can make me unaware of a lot of things. And I'm so grateful to the people around me, my collaborators, and many of my friends who along the way have shown me and continue to show me the ways that I should show up. And another thing that the privilege does is give me a platform to amplify the voices of these incarcerated writers. And that feels like the most important thing that I can do. And that is the whole point of the Prison Music Project, was just to take, going into the prison and working with these artists and hearing their stories. I was totally changed. And I thought, well, surely anyone who witnesses this will be as changed as I am. And I wanted to bring these stories and make them heard by people who, similar to me, were otherwise, sheltered from the whole idea of incarceration and the impacts of the criminal justice system. Because if more people are aware of this problem, maybe we can change it. And if it's more of a conversation, maybe we can change it. And because I didn't have the power to bring, a lot of people, thousands of people, millions of people into the prison, of course, with me to visit and see what was going on. And I didn't have the ability to take people out of the prison so they could share with their bodies and their voices. I did to the best of my ability. I took the stories out with me, and in some cases was able to record the voices of the folks inside over the phone, or two of the folks have been released and are now free. And luckily they get to speak with their bodies and their voices, and I try to help and assist with that as much as I can. But that's what it means to me, and I'm always messing up, and I always know that I can do better. I think that's maybe the main thing, being a white person doing this work, is that I have to accept and know that I am messing up, and I will continue to mess up, and I need to be open to criticism and not defensive, and I need to be constantly working to do better.
I think being a white artist is not so different than just being a white citizen. I don't draw a particular delineation between those two. I feel like the undoing of racism really rests on the shoulders of white people and white communities. And that's a responsibility that I have taken seriously for many years, starting in high school. My knowledge and education about what it looks like to be a white ally or accomplice has gotten a lot more sophisticated over the years, because there are more and more communities of people, for example, standing up for racial or showing up for racial justice is an amazing organization of white allies that I work with at times. I participate in their events, rather. I work with an organization called Bend the Arc Jewish Action, which is not exclusively a white organization, because Jews of color are certainly a part of the landscape of Jewishness, but a lot of the activists I've met in Bend the Arc are white, and it feels really right to be doing decarceration work from a Jewish community perspective. There's also in the Bay Area, just this morning, literally at 7 a.m. this morning, I was on email. There's an organization here called Dancing Around Race. I wouldn't even say it's an organization. It's a coalition of artists of color who are really working to decolonize arts ownership and arts resources, dance resources in the Bay Area. And they put out a call yesterday for some support around one particular person who was being racially confrontative, and a lot of white artists responded. And so this morning we've decided that we're going to meet, have a conversation, see how we can be more organized in responding to racism in the, the intimate world of our dance community, which is my first world. is my dance world. It's the, you know, well, maybe aside from my family and my son, but like it's the intimate world where I live the most deeply. And so it's really important to me that equity enters that space in an active way. So those are some of the things I think about as a citizen, and then they spill over into my artistry, because I am someone who really lives in the world body first, and I lead with movement and organizing movement and pulling ideas and political change toward physical movement. So that's being in a white body as an artist for me these days.
Thank you both for sharing such an intimate perspective. And it really leads to my next question, which is about how do you do your work, or how does your respective work support people who have been and are incarcerated? We've heard a lot about your oral histories, Jo, and I'm really looking forward to hear more about the collaborators in the album. So, but for you, Jo, how is it that, how are you involved in partnership with your work or incarcerated people?
Well, the first in the trilogy was focusing on women with incarcerated loved ones. So we were really looking at a proximate relationship to the prisons. In fact, we performed the piece right next to Sing Sing prison in New York because, you know, women are the de facto reentry system of the prison system, because reentry is such a failed process if we look at what resources the state offers. It's a deep failure. And so women take it on. We also take on a lot of primary support for the folks, for our loved ones who are inside. And that's financial, and that's in terms of keeping our families connected. And that's in terms of, you know, socio-emotional connection as well. So that is how I grounded the first in the trilogy. The second in the trilogy is called Meet Us Quickly with Your Mercy. And it opens in October, fingers crossed. It's an outdoor performance, so we are allowed to do it in the context of COVID. We hope. There's some questions there as the numbers are on the rise right now. But my primary collaborator is a man named Rahsaan Thomas. Some know him by New York, that's his nickname. He is one of the co-hosts of Ear Hustle. But when I set out to do the second in the trilogy, I asked the question, how can Jewish and Black voices amplify the call for racial justice via an end to mass incarceration? And so I put out a call for a Black change maker, and Rahsaan responded to that. And he is someone who works from a cell at San Quentin. So his access to resources, tools, communication is limited. And he has done an amazing job. He co-founded an organization called Prison Renaissance to do just this, to build the bridge between those behind the walls and those not. And so the project has been led by the both of us to the extent that that has been possible. I am, of course, have the freedom that he doesn't have. And so a lot of the logistics and doing do come from me. But conceptually, I've tried to be really rigorous in working together to create the model, to create the title, to create as many aspects of the production and the whole of the project that I could include. And one of the things that Rahsaan has brought to the project is he organized and got together 19 pieces of visual art from folks who were working in San Quentin behind the walls. So the project includes what is now going to be a digital art exhibit of people who are working as artists behind bars. And those pieces of art are going to be for sale. So that was something that Rahsaan thought of and brought to the project, and I thought it was brilliant. And one of our other collaborators is the Museum of African Diaspora, and they are managing that aspect of the project. So yeah, I try as best I can to build coalition that features people who are incarcerated, are formerly incarcerated, are family members of the incarcerated, and who are also have nothing to do with these things, but want to be of use and want to be effective politically in abolitionist strategies.
Thank you, Joe. And for you, Zoe, how are folks? How do you collaborate with men who have been incarcerated or not incarcerated?
I mean, so it started. It started with one song, which I was the catalyst for it. I asked a writer, a rapper, who I heard perform inside the prison, if I could use his words. I really appreciated his words and his story, and I thought that they spoke very eloquently to the issue of mass incarceration and how it relates to race and class in this country. So that's how it started, was with one collaboration, and I sort of took his words and made a song that I could sing using his story with his permission. And then I played that song in different parts of the prison on different yards to different audiences of incarcerated men. And I got a lot of, will you do that with my writing? Here's a poem I wrote. Here's a rap I wrote. Here's this. Will you do that with my song? And will you play it for audiences outside? I want to share my story. And so I think what's important for me about this is that I was answering a call. I was called to do this by the people whose stories I'm amplifying. And that's where it started. And along the way, including the writers in decision making, making sure that they own their work. And the album is a benefit. So the album sales go to the Southern Center for Human Rights, who hold the funds and administer them when we decide as a collective where we want them to go and what projects we want to support. And the incarcerated writers, of course, have a say in that more so than I do, for instance. But the royalties from the songs that these writers own, they will see the profit from that. And that is important to me, to make sure that, you know, this project isn't just using their work as a tool to educate people who are not impacted by incarceration, but also giving real support. And in our capitalist society, that looks like money. Making sure that they're being compensated for their work in that way. Yeah, those are some ways that I work with incarcerated people.
Well, thanks for that, Zoe. And I think now would be a really perfect time to see some and hear some music from the Prison Music Project. Could you tell us a little bit about what we're going to see and hear?
Yeah. So the piece that we're going to play is called I Can't Breathe, and it was written 6 years ago. Actually, it wasn't written. It's a freestyle rap, and it was performed 6 years ago after Eric Garner was murdered by NYPD. And it was recorded over the phone, and it was freestyled by Bruce Dixon, who also goes by Sincere. And there's beatboxing in the back by Alex Patrice, who is actually the first writer that I collaborated with on a different track on the album called Survivalist. And you're not only going to see this piece, but which is a music video for the track I Can't Breathe, but also as we were setting up this recording and this interview, who called me on the phone from prison but Sincere. So you'll hear from Sincere himself, and then you'll see his video.
What's going on, Zoe? What's happening?
Well, you call it a very interesting time. Good timing. I'm I'm having this conversation with another artist activist in the realm that I work and you work with the decarceration mindset, and and we're recording this conversation so that folks can watch it later on. So, you got anything to say on that regard?
Man, I mean, it's in prison right now. It's a lot of beautiful minds in here, for as artists, music, poetry, writing, and if they can just get a second chance or get their voice heard from behind these walls, it really helps, because I just got some more fan mail yesterday.
You did.
So yeah.
That's so great. From the I Can't Breathe video?
Yeah, from the I Can't Breathe. So it's like, that's like my positive motivation now. You know what I mean?
Cool.
That's my incentive. That's my incentive to keep striving and keep struggling to do the best I can to get home and be productive and be in the middle of what's going on out there.
Yeah. How do you feel like art can play a role in making those changes?
Well, because a lot of people feel like they don't have talents. You know, like I come to realize I got more talents than just music and writing. You know, I got a talent of communication. You know, but I do it through my music and I do it through my writing to touch people. So when people realize the talents that they got through the arts, and that their talent can change lives and help people and motivate people, oh man, they'll want to do that more than anything else.
Yeah.
You know, when you in here and you feel like, you know, a lot of times in these institutions, we feel like we don't matter, or our voice don't matter, and so we choose to just mess up. But when people come in from the streets and they bring the arts into here and let us use those as outlets to communicate with the world, and then we see the response we getting from the world, that make us want to go out there and really be a part of helping the world be better. So the arts is really very important when it comes to rehabilitation.
Government officials, they playing games. Look them in their eyes. I know they lame. I can't breathe. That's what he yelled out when he got put in the chokehold and died. Nigga right there, dog, on his knees. We begging, please. We under siege. Is we really safe up in our city streets? Urban societies, we all misfits, trying to fit in, but they won't let us in. We dying right here in the front of our own kin. They all out there, they acting like they are best friends. Can't trust the wolf in street clothes. He's showing his face too much, so I know for that reason he wanna kill me though. Bloodthirsty Babylon wanna see me dead. Really the holes right off that my black small head. I'm third-eyed wide, not third-eyed blind. While I'm watching youngsters in the middle of the street as they die yelling free. I can't breathe. Somebody get this Babylon off me, they yelling free. Shit, I can't breathe. Youngsters get squeezed in the middle of the street, they yelling free. I can't breathe. They killing us every day in the middle of the street, I'm yelling free. I can't breathe. Breathe. I can't breathe. After Grant got murked at the port, hands behind his back, poke, thinking he was smart. Fucking Mort. Then he went for his taser gun, but the folk kept busting his head off. Right there on Raw TV, and he still got out in the year, see? Me, I thought a nigga 3 times getting out, but they gave me 25 to life. Now show me where justice at. Show me where justice at. Shit, I'm trying to figure, is this just us, or is just us? If it's just us, it's so blind, so I know a nigga when it comes to my kind.
Thank you so much. And that was Sincere with I Can't Breathe from the Prison Music Project. Glad that we got to share that with folks. That was really, really beautiful. And to continue with my lines of questions, something that I know that you both hold in common is that I've heard you both say that art humanizes. And to that end, what is the role that art plays in the movement? What is its relationship to people in the movement? Zoe?
I think, there's so many tools that we can use in the movement, and we need to use them all because this is a complex machine that we are dismantling. And one of the tools is statistics, and one of the tools is marching and protesting, and one of the tools is history and literature, and one of the tools is art. And the way that art is different than just information or statistics is through stories, through music, through movement, through visual art. We connect to a feeling rather than just an intellectual knowledge, and it activates empathy in a different way. And I think for me, more so. And I think empathy needs to be at the core of the society that we are building, as we are dismantling the racism and the classism and the punitiveness in our current culture. What we need to be centering is empathy, and I think art is a huge, huge part of that.
And I would say, just to continue what Zoe was saying, people listen to statistics, but they feel with art. And I think Zoe and I are part of a group of artists, around the country who are working to change and inform the narrative around prisons. I think there's an incredible amount of mythology about what prisons do, especially among white communities who can be very removed from it. I would say that if you took all the people of color out of prison, there's still a whole lot of white people in there. So mass incarceration is such a nasty beast. It really has infected, all aspects of populations of the country. But I think the mythology around what prisons do is really different than the reality. The food is stamped not for human consumption. And I know that from my partner telling me that when he worked in the kitchen. There's maggots in the food. There's bugs in the food. People don't know that. When I have performed the weight room, when my company, my amazing group of dancers who bring the piece to life, when they have performed the weight room around the country, we have two really consistent responses. One is from white women who say, I had no idea that that is what women went through who have an incarcerated loved one. So just a complete eye-opening to what the experience is, what the financial burdens are, what the burdens are on your family, how the shame, the isolation that make you sort of curl up in a ball and not want to talk to anyone when your loved one is incarcerated. And that's a universal experience across race, class, and gender, actually. And that's something that's been well documented by ESSIE Justice Group. But another reaction I have gotten is from young Black men who have said to me, I had no idea that's what my mother was going through because of my brother, because of my cousin, or because of my father. So an illumination and reinforcement for people who are touched by the criminal justice systems is also something that I think Zoe and I can do. So I like to think that, we're bringing people toward us who are very uninformed about prisons, and we're also speaking with folks who live this reality and who need some support.
Amazing. And speaking of that support, what do you think that viewers can do right now to help get involved, actually? Zoe?
Two groups that I know of in Minneapolis that are fighting for these changes, and thus far it seems like they're succeeding and having a lot of victory in this is MPD 150 and Black Visions Collective. So in Minneapolis, those are two groups that that could use support, and I could name some in New Orleans, like Southerners on New Ground, New Orleans Workers Group, Voice of the Experienced, Women with a Vision. Yeah, those are some that come to mind.
Thank you. And Jo, what are some calls to action that folks can really get involved with?
Well, I think the first thing people can do is listen to the Prison Music Project, because it's really awesome. It's just amazing art and amazing communication and storytelling, and pulling forward the voices of the incarcerated is so important, and this project does that really beautifully. I think the divest invest model is really important, taking money away from what's not working and putting money toward what's needed. There are so many things in our communities to invest in that are connected to health, education, arts, communication, job readiness. Those are all things that we probably all know who's doing that work. And so giving a leg up by volunteering, by donating, by getting involved. I'd say there are other things. If you own a business, you can hire a formerly incarcerated person. That's such a simple thing to do that makes a world of difference. The kind of employment discrimination that goes on for returning citizens is impossible to describe. And it's so vast and deep. So if you are a landlord or you rent out a room, rent out to someone who's formerly incarcerated, because again, the biases toward people in housing are also huge. Volunteer. If you are part of a church or a synagogue, create a partnership with a group who's working inside the prison. Those, cross-cultural, I call them, those cross-cultural collaborations are incredibly effective, as you see from what Zoe has described and what she has done. So those are just a few kind of general ideas.
Thank you both so much for sharing about the Weight Room and about the Prison Music Project. Thank you for taking the time, for being here. And thank you, Jo and Zoe, each for centering art as the creator of empathy, transformation, and a way to shift toxic paradigms within ourselves and outwardly within communities. Thank you both.